Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Game Changers event. I'm Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO of this fantastic library. And on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you to your state library. I also like to extend a welcome to those watching at Rockhampton Regional Library and Laidley Library, and we're co-hosting live-streamed events at those libraries this evening, so hi. Let me also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet and pay my respects to their ancestors who came before them. And I'm sure you know that the State Library is located on Kurilpa Point, which is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people. And of course, here at the State Library, we continue that tradition every day. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome our speaker for this evening, Wayne Denning from Carbon Creative. So welcome back to the State Library, Wayne. Ray Weeks, Chairman of the CEO Institute and our facilitator for this evening, members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation Council, the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee, and also QUT Business School. And of course, a warm welcome to our generous donors and sponsors, Crowe Howarth, Channel 7, Morgans, NAB and RACQ. So thank you all for joining us tonight at our August Game Changers conversation. This event series brings together innovative leaders from business, technology and creative industries together to share their insights with us. The event series provides an opportunity to hear the honest, personal reflections of some of Queensland's leading game changers in business as they share their pathways to success and some of their battles and triumphs along the way. Game Changers is an initiative of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, and the Business Leaders Hall of Fame was established in 2009 by the State Library, the Queensland Library Foundation and the QUT Business School. And the Hall of Fame celebrates, records and retells stories of Queensland's outstanding business leaders and their many contributions to the development of this state. There are 4 conversations in the 2017 Game Changers series, and they delve into the minds of individuals who have made significant developments in their industries, revealing their insights and experiences. And I'm sure that their stories will fill you with inspiration and knowledge to incorporate into your own professional endeavours. Tonight, we are really pleased to be welcoming Wayne Denning, Managing Director and Executive Producer of Carbon Creative. In 2006, Wayne took a leap from his successful career in government to establish Carbon Creative, a full-service creative agency designed to give a positive voice to Indigenous Australians. Earlier this month, Wayne, who's a graduate of QUT Business School, which was well done, Wayne, was named a Special Excellence winner at the 2017 QUT Outstanding Alumni Awards for achievements and contributions to Indigenous communities. And earlier this week, Carbon Creative was announced as a finalist in the inaugural Indigenous Digital Excellence Awards for their STEM IM initiative, which encourages Indigenous children and youth to start robotics and coding as an important building block to their future. And I'm pleased to say that SLQ is one of the collaborators, so we wish you luck in those awards as well. So this evening's event is being live streamed on our website, and to those live stream viewers out there, including Rockhampton and Laidley, we encourage you to tweet your questions using the hashtag QBLHOF, and it's on the screen as well for the people who are here tweeting as well. So we do encourage you to tweet and tweet questions as well, or you can hold on to your questions and we'll take those at the end of tonight's conversation. So Ray and Wayne will address as many questions as possible that come through on the tweets. So for now, I'd like to welcome Ray Weeks to the stage to introduce Wayne and to begin tonight's conversation. Thank you, Ray.
Well, good evening and welcome to our Game Changers event, and it's a special one. Now, as a successful entrepreneur, Wayne Denning will be sharing the story of his journey from the very small coal mining town of Blackwater in central Queensland to wheeling and dealing with Sesame Street producers in New York, and you'll see a little bit tonight, to developing creative works centred around Indigenous culture and experiences that influence social change. Wayne, as Vicky said, as Managing Director of Carbon Creative, he did leave a very successful career with the federal government to start creative media, quite a leap of faith. a full-service creative agency that delivers engaging content and compelling storytelling to give a positive voice to Indigenous Australians. Now, when he's not delivering advertising campaigns for positive social change, he's on the boards of the Queensland Theatre Company and also the National Film and Sound Archive. Wayne is also an advanced Queensland digital champion. Now, Carbon Creative, which you'll again better understand tonight, does help shape and share stories and ideas. Wayne and his team remain anchored in social change. Now, Wayne Denning will tonight allow you to understand why he loves being an entrepreneur, one who combines his sense of social responsibility with creativity. And you'll hear why shortly, but before we get underway, we're going to show you a film, a short film, but it may tell you a little of what Carbon Creative is about.
We know who we are. We always have. We innovate, invent, survive, thrive. Like mine before, we are wise, leading us so to empower. Through our lens we see yours and go with you to make a positive difference, to give a positive voice. Proudly Aboriginal. This is Carbon Creative.
Please welcome Wayne Denning.
Thank you.
Now, Wayne, why don't we start off by talking about Carbon Media, now Carbon Creative. Just what does it do, and what's its real reason for being?
I suppose it goes back to the reason I created Carbon Media and then evolved into Carbon Creative, which was really about exactly everything you've just said. It's about, I was frustrated having had those years inside government, going from a very proactive and social change agenda, which was in the early 90s, to a progressive, more conservative approach in the mid-90s through to the early 2000s. And in terms of, I became quite frustrated with that, and particularly the way the portrayal of Indigenous people was being presented in the mainstream and on news and all those sorts of things. And I got particularly frustrated about that. And I think the ability to communicate effectively and put ideas about what Indigenous people really wanted and what that we're not considered in the deficit, and that we do want positive contributions to be a part of the society, but we can be leaders, not only to our own people, but to the country, and to be held up in that space. So to me, it was about facilitating a mechanism to do that. And, and subsequently Carbon Media and now Carbon Creative came to be. Yeah.
The word carbon, explain that.
Well, it was interesting. I was sort of toying with the idea when I came up with the company idea, which I was pretty fascinated by. There's a rugby sponsorship in Europe, O2, and a telecommunications company. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I saw that. And I think it was just after the British had beaten us in the English had beaten us in the World Cup in rugby. So it was a bit slightly annoying, but it sort of stuck in my head that, let's think. I love that element. I love the idea of simplicity around that, but something that says something. And the beauty of carbon, it's a base element. It's on the periodic table. It's 6, and all life is derived from we're carbon beings and everything in it. So it gives this sense of eternal connectivity, original, and I thought being an Indigenous person and where we come from and our way into the future, the word carbon really epitomised that to me, and it was quite, that was the reason, and it was just prior to all the debate around carbon trading and carbon tax and all those sorts of things. So I know it went sort of bad at that point, but once you explain it, people sort of get it. So
Good, thanks. Now, telling inspirational Indigenous stories and portraying Indigenous role models, positive Indigenous role models, is really at the heart of your work. So a decade on, this is a decade on now from when you created Carbon Media and Carbon Creative. Can you describe some key moments when you think this did come to fruition, when you actually understood this was going to work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say I ever think it's ever going to fully work. I just think it's almost a game of inches, really. I think sometimes when we get momentum around things and then you slightly get frustrated. But I think we've got a bit of a move forward now. We did the first ever. I mean, we were very experimental as a company when we first started. We did live broadcasts from the Torres Strait. We did live web streaming, not dissimilar to tonight, but this is probably 10 years ago. So those sorts of things and very remote challenges thrown at us, and the idea was really connecting people. And I thought, well, let's proceed. I mean, being innovative, being change-driven. Some of it works, some of it's not, but taking those sorts of risks, but in an acceptable margins of a risk, I think, pushing forward. But I suppose for me, really, the crux point for it all, that shift is probably only in relative recent times, in probably last year, when we moved into Carbon Creative from the company the initial company of Carbon Media and the brand, and sort of split our two identities to a degree, from television to campaign or agency work.
Let's talk about risk for a minute, just your appetite for risk. Because you talk about the need for risk to drive success, to drive creativity. So what's your view of risk, and what's your level of appetite for risk?
I would say I probably take too much risks at times.
Yeah.
I think, I probably like to jump ahead. I like technology. I get excited by those sorts of things. Although, I am surrounded by people that advise me well about risk, and my wife and my management team are extremely level-headed when it comes to those sorts of things, whereas I'm probably a little bit more excitable about doing things getting things a bit out of control. But we push forward and then we take a step back. So it's that sort of thing. So risk, it does drive innovation. It does drive. It creates that urgency that we need to put our hand up and take ownership of a problem and accept responsibility. I think those sorts of things are really quite important as a leader and as a manager. And I think by nature of seeing a vision and trying to sell a vision and take people with you, you've got to be able to analyse and strategise around risk.
Let's just explore some of the values that have really shaped you. And where do you get your values from that have a direct bearing on you and your entrepreneurial spirit?
Core values for me come from my family, without a doubt, I think. And a lot of that goes to my grandmother and my mother and my father, who, my grandmother grew up in time in the state and in Australia where she was, not necessarily, she wasn't a citizen, she was an Aboriginal lady, pre-1967, and, she had faced significant adversity, but always had a smile, was someone who was resilient and strong, spoke no ill thoughts of anybody, but really worked really hard. So those sorts of things definitely epitomised my mother and went into her and her siblings, and also linkages with my father, who's an English man, who again gave me a bit of a thought about the world. He again, very hard-working person, but who epitomised that the place is bigger than just the local. So it sort of gave me an idea that if he could, as a young 28-year-old guy, move across the world and take up an opportunity to start a life in another country and meet an Aboriginal community people and just start a life totally different to everything he probably expected, and it turned out pretty cool.
But Wayne, let's just stay with your grandmother for a minute, because she was such an inspiration to you, your grandmother, and she taught you a number of life lessons. She had that generous spirit, as you said, but take us through why she was such an inspiration.
Look, she was a strong woman of faith. She really believed in a lot of things. She was really strong around family and community, and had great friends and good networks. She didn't have much in the way of material or money and those sorts of things, but she was a lady that just loved in a way and was so encompassing of everyone that sort of knew her, and you can't go wrong with those sorts of values. But I really do think her ability, once, not that she ever mentioned much when she was alive, but when you find out some of the harder things that she had to live through, and it was difficult. I remember a story that I heard. They grew up. My grandfather and my nan were courting. Well, you weren't officially allowed to court without permission from the Aboriginal protector. They lived in Warrabinda in central Queensland, and just hearing very clever ways in which men had to express feelings that they were slightly interested in a girl outside sanctioned sort of social occasions, and it was like, it's crazy, but men used to spit in the direction of a girl that they liked. It's just because they weren't allowed to. So they got
downwind or upwind?
I don't know. I'd hope, yeah. So you got to dodge it. But suddenly, and I remember my nan had to spend a night in lockup because she waved to share her, show her that she was interested. She waved to my granddad, and so she had to be put away because they saw it, so she wasn't allowed to do that. So just a simple wave of love for a teenage, young, early 20s, I suppose, girl, and that just showed you some of the things. But she never spoke much about those sorts of things.
No,
it was just continued to be and was embracing of everybody and everyone's cultures. So.
You also drew inspiration and life lessons from the fellows on the $50 note, David Unipon. What's about his story that inspired you?
Well, I think, he was a certified genius, and this is a man that is very familiar to us all, because we probably, I know times are tough, but we hopefully got him a couple of $50 notes in our pockets occasionally, and the reality is that David Unipon was an amazing Australian. He was an Aboriginal man, born about 130 years ago. He innovated. He was the Da Vinci of our country. He linked to me our traditional ways of doing things to the way of innovating and inspiring a country. He created the orbital shear, which is still on the $50 note. It celebrates everything about him, and it's still used today. And this country grew up on the sheep's back. If anyone would have told you that at some point in your life, and you would have understood that, well, the man who changed that, made economic wealth for Australia, was an Aboriginal man, but he was widely disregarded in that sense. So, and to me, but he continued. He wrote about issues. He was a very brave Australian and a strong Aboriginal man. And to me, this idea of innovation and resilience and leadership as an Aboriginal person, but for the whole country,
was embodied in him.
Yeah, embodied in him, an inspiration to me. Should be an inspiration to all Australians.
Now, in 2013, you made TV history by producing the first ever Australian content for Sesame Street's 5 Kangaroos, starring Indigenous singer and actress Jessica Mauboy. What was important about this moment for the company? And you did a bit of wheeling and dealing with the New York producers about this moment for the company and for the history books, in your view.
Well, who would have thought a 90-second clip would have the impact it has on everything that, for me and for the company, but way beyond that. And kids are still jumping around to it. But look, the reality was I went to New York. I had an idea that we needed to get content to be taken seriously at that time in the children's television space. And I'd heard from a great kids television producer, a lady called Di Manson, who's an Australian who lives in New York, who gave us good connections and said, you need to get in front of the Sesame Workshop team. And Di introduced us, or gave us an opportunity, or spoke about someone to go talk to a lady called Kimberly Wright. And we pitched the idea of working with Jessica Mauboy, that we would go over there, and we've got this idea of working in come down under and work with Australian content and Australian kids, because it's never been done before. They weren't looking for Australian content. They weren't even looking for English content. They were looking for Hispanic content for America. It was freezing cold. It was February in New York. I was dodging black ice and things like that. It was one of the coldest winters on record, and it snowed in those supercells that they talk about. It was crazy times. And she took a leap of faith. I went with a pack that we presented our beautiful art, and I think we had ears for emu and all sorts of other things and all these ideas. And and I just really wanted to be, if we had the first content on Sesame Workshop, and I grew up on this as a kid, I was 45 years old at that point as an as a production, and for us to be there, I just wanted it to be Indigenous kids and Indigenous talent and Indigenous kids to be a part of that. And I didn't have Jessica. She didn't know I was over there pitching that she was on board with the show. She didn't have a clue. Sony didn't certainly know. They were all, they'd have found out. And then, you know, Sesame Workshop, to their credit, Kimberly and others, the producers went down. I think Sapphires was screening in a theatre somewhere in Manhattan, and
There's one theatre in the whole of New York.
Yeah. That's just, we think we're a big part of the world, but sometimes we're not. And and they went down and said, "Oh, we'll go listen to this girl. She sounds really good." So they did, and she said, "Yeah, we'll refocus it. We'll come on board with you to produce 5 kangaroos." So and. Next thing you know, we're in Alice Springs. Jessica's on board, minus her luggage, which went missing. But we went to Target. So we had a totally different wardrobe for her. But anyway, she's a great person and a lovely, lovely Australian. So she's beautiful. But next thing you know, we're in the Todd River with the kids from Birri School and Jessica Malboy creating Australian television history.
Do you want to see a film about this? Yeah, let's watch it. Great. Let's just explore some of your personal attributes too, just as a leader, as an entrepreneur. We're going to explore in a second why you love being an entrepreneur, but that have been these leadership attributes, your effectiveness as an entrepreneur have been key factors in your success story. But is there a personal story where you best understood your leadership capacity? Because a lot of leaders will tell us, point in their lives, someone said to them, explored with them, a capacity they didn't really think they had.
You know, I mean, I guess it's constant self-reflection. I mean, I think it's a journey, and I mean, putting myself forward as a leader, even the word entrepreneur sort of sits slightly uneasy with me. I get what that means, but I think particularly I look at people who are leaders in this country and around the world, and there are attributes that inspire me and that make me feel stronger about certain things. You certainly gleam and try and pull ways of being better at what you do. I mean, there's certainly it's something I struggle with. I've got to be honest with. I've got the truest aspect probably in really recent times is as we evolve as a company, letting go of my day-to-day hands-on approach to things. I've got really amazing team and management that are just, and I've just got to take a step. And to me, I suppose leading by realising that as a small business who's slightly corporatising in a different way and taking on things, and we've got new challenges. There are other people. I used to be pretty much a generalist doing everything. Now we've got good specialists that are better at things than I am. That's the bottom line. And my ability to surround myself with the better people that are great members of my team. I always say it in the back of my head, but I've got to remind myself that, you can't do it. Sometimes you can't do it all, and that your leadership is actually bringing those teams together, inspiring that, and getting a common objective, and selling our dream, really, which is it's an interesting one. We, as a company, we are a commercial business, but we have values, so it's, profit with purpose type initiative. But to actually sell that into the way Australia works and the way the mindset works, that you can be commercial but also want to change the world, is something I feel something relatively foreign. We're not really about a secret objective here. We just want to make, particularly the focus on Indigenous Australians and the disadvantaged groups of Australia, and actually make things a bit better in terms of that, and give it a voice, and be quite positive around that. And that doesn't always mean reflecting on a deficit or a disadvantaged need. It's also about promoting and celebrating heroes and leaders and role models, and really saying that as a country we can get behind this, and it doesn't always have to be on a sporting field or an art gallery. It can be in all shapes. It would be as scientists, and that's why we are very passionate about STEM IM and engineering and coding and science, and getting as many Indigenous people and other kids into that.
But the best advice I ever got as a CEO was surround yourself with the best people.
Exactly.
Make your expectations clear, and then constantly demonstrate your trust and confidence in their capacity to deliver. But the hardest thing was letting go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a very current thing for me, really, in all honesty. I mean, I've been very much at the helm of this company. It's 12 years now, coming up 12 years since we created it. And, started as a project plan at QUTM, at the MBA program. I pitched it, and the guys got behind it as a bit of and we did a project. The business plan was absolutely nothing like what really running a business was like at the time, but it certainly stood me in good stead in terms of where we've landed. And the ability to realise that tells you by its very nature you surround yourself with good teams and good people that bring different attributes to the table. Working with teams in that way, and even to sell it at that point. Now, we've got professionals at the table. We're dealing with significant campaigns that are making strong messaging, or providing strong messaging to making lives better and promoting positive social change.
But if I ask members of your team, tell us about Wayne. What does he represent? What does he stand for? What do you think they'd say?
I think they think that I'm very passionate about making the place a better place, really. I think my values are very much driven by that. I get very frustrated by that. Sometimes I get concerned that why doesn't everyone see this idea? And I lose it a bit about that, but that's just that's just who I am, and I suppose I'm impatient with those things. But yeah.
So what are the values you look for in people that work for you?
Look, it's really driven by team. We make mistakes sometimes, but I really value that sort of capacity to gel a team, and it's becoming more around building machine parts or something. I feel like we're getting the right cogs to the right, and this is a journey we've been on. I've had different teams at different times in the life of Carbon, and to get to the point now where I think it's more of a sophisticated approach to certain things, and the team that I have today is nothing like the team I had 5 years ago or 6 years ago. It's just evolved, and I see it as a constant. And the vision and the clarity around the objectives at which we're trying to achieve now that's the direction we'll be going in into the next period. And talking about leadership before, one of the attributes that I really like is the ability to reinvent yourself and to use that team, and to whilst the name Carbon stays consistent, I would say we're nothing like we used to be, and that's kept me fresh. That ability to move from being a public servant working in government, being an advisor, to creating a television production company essentially, and now moving into stronger social change campaigns. To me, they're different careers. They are, each time we evolve. And I literally was talking to Rebecca, who's one of my management team, who the other day about reinventing yourself around and doing, and my wife as well, around doing studies, doing things and trying to evolve around what your learnings are, and just saying we've got to keep fresh, you've got to keep evolving and looking for the innovation, and that excites me as a person.
So that keeps differentiating yourself, it keeps you ahead of the game? Is that the way you stay ahead of the game?
Yeah. I think, well, firstly realising that you can't stay still. I think it's an interesting perspective. We literally interviewed a strategic strategist, social media guru in all of 22, and she blew my mind away yesterday. And I just couldn't, unbelievable. It was just, I think I know something about something, and just to have someone who's just absolutely amazing in terms of the way we have to communicate and how we have to engage. And it's easy to say that, and we realise that the platforms that are being used in social media and other ways in terms of selling a message are continually evolving, but to actually to recruit the right people around that sort of space and gives us that edge was something I was very excited about, particularly since you said yes.
Wayne, you're the creator of this. I just want to come back to STEM for a minute. You created this STEM project, the Queensland Government Initiative, that aims to increase the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, students, pursuing STEM at university through targeted engagement activities for young people. But just explain why this particular work and your social model of enterprise is just so important to you.
Well, I suppose STEM is something, a few years ago, I originally started out studying engineering before I didn't want to do it anymore. It was too hard. And I sort of felt this isn't really what I wanted to do. But sort of always passionate. I love technology. I love the idea of inventing things, and I was pretty excited about that at that time. But I did a presentation at the University of Melbourne's. They held an inaugural engineering summit, Indigenous Engineering Summit, and we spoke about David Unipen at that summit. And this is a university, and I think their engineering school is top 10 in the world. At 130 plus year old institution. It had 3 Indigenous graduates in engineering, and they were dismayed about that, and I was equally dismayed by that fact. I understand the reasons behind why that might be hard, but that's not right. And I think the main thing for Indigenous kids is not realising the opportunities that may exist for them. And much to the situation, my grandparents probably wouldn't know the doors that are open to me and the opportunities presented to me. And I'd like to claim credit for that statement, but that's Noel Pearson who said that. But those sorts of things are really important. And I thought, the digital economy we're looking at, then I don't think we can afford to use the term close the gap, another gap appear for Indigenous kids, particularly those that don't even know the opportunity exists. And I became quite concerned about that, so I thought we needed to do something. And yes, it is part of a Queensland initiative, but it's a national initiative. We firstly pitched the idea and went to Google Australia, came on board very promptly. The Queensland government's been fantastic as well in this state, and it's something we're very passionate about.
One thing we just spoke about the other day, which really resonated with me, is you described the crystal clear skies and the landscape of Central Australia. What it means to you personally, and also the bearing it has on your thinking. Just explain that.
Well, you would have seen with the intro piece that said this is carbon creative, and there's some art that captures that's the Milky Way. And around that Milky Way, that's really carbon's value statement. It's that piece of Aboriginal art is our values, and it puts our team and the people sitting around, our clients, we're all around that, but we're looking at the Milky Way, and it's because that's the big thinking, and that's the strategies and the ideas about that. And the Milky Way, to me, I remember growing up as a boy in Blackwater, but also when travelling in the Northern Territory and so forth, and watching shooting stars, and it gives you a sense of place, and a sense of opportunity and where you need to be and where we can go. And that just, I just said, I'm in this very small town. You can feel very alone, but you know there's something greater out there. And I think, to me, that's an inspirational point of view, and it just certainly stimulates your mind in a way that. And the other point I think we said the other day, you're looking at the past, but you're in the future too at the same time, because that light takes millions of years to come to you from those stars, and then what you do with that is, you can change the world with that.
You're talking about landscapes. You talk about the changing digital landscape, creating endless opportunities for young entrepreneurs. How do you see this?
Well, it's totally what it is, but I think one of the things, I think a lot of it's back to being true old-fashioned values too. We can see all these opportunities in the tech and so forth, but good, strong communication skills, ability to look at problem solving and pitch ideas, still work in a social context. I think these are the values that we need to ensure, despite what the mechanism, be it a piece of technology, be it coding, be it a social media platform, but actually staying true to those sorts of values as a society, as people, as humans, and going back to some very ancient ways of working and linking that will set us in good stead for the future.
Has the fear of failure been a factor in your... Is it a great motivator for you? Has it figured in your journey, that fear of failure? There's a lot of entrepreneurs will say that.
I don't believe I'll fail. I know it's constant. I believe, and just maybe it's delusion and the signs of a madman, but it's the reality is that if I believed I was going to fail, I don't know if I'd take the challenge.
Does the fear figure in you? The fear of...
I don't know if I fear it. I think that's an acceptable reality. You've got to deal with that. Failure is inevitable, and learning from failure is the valuable lesson you take from that. It's the step. But then you say, was that really a failure, or was it just another way of moving forward? And you change direction, or that wasn't meant to be. It's just those sorts. I think, long as you reflect on failure, on your learnings, and actually incorporate that into where you want to go into the future.
So, what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know when you started out on this journey?
I didn't know. I don't know if I am particularly patient, but I didn't know that I suppose I didn't know what I didn't know, really. I struggled with the fact, I thought things were easier. I thought, naively thought, you follow these, the textbooks and that sort of those sorts of thinkings, and you hear the rhetoric, the jargon, the team, and all these sorts of things. But the practical application of that is like there are true things in that. It's like you've got to get it right. We've had some monumental failures in recruitment. We've had some monumental failures in my own decisions. But despite that, we've sustained, moved forward, took those punches, and dusted ourselves off and moved on. I didn't know I would be able to survive that. And I think that word around resilience and the drive towards innovation, it probably just didn't factor as much as I thought it would.
And persistence.
Yeah.
So, having said that, what do you think distinguishes successful entrepreneurs? Anything else? Resilience, persistence, what else?
I think the innovation aspect. I think you've got to keep looking for opportunities to innovate. And I know it's a jargon word and we throw it out there, but it's to actually take that. And I suppose innovation is actually to evolve, to accept risk, to learn, to take that and own things. I think accountability is another key element to me. Is actually, if I'm looking for recruiting people, and the type of people I like to work with are those that take responsibility and own it. I think. And that's not always the case, but owning something, I think, and taking that I've got this, I'm going to drive this forward, and taking that responsibility on an accountable level is something really cool and really strong and an essential part of successful business.
And give them space to take that ownership.
Yeah,
Create
well,
that ownership.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you've
Right.
got to, you can't control it. So you've got to allow people to make mistakes, but you want them, if they do make mistakes, to say, "I made that mistake."
So your burning passion from here, your burning desire, your the fundamental differences that you want to make. Just explain, and where you see this in 5 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like some of the programs that we're working on. You know, one of the things that we do, and it's one of our sweet spots as a creative agency, is we did a smoking campaign called "Don't Make Smoke Your Story" with an Aboriginal man and his family, his trials and tribulations, and a guy called Ted in the ads. And it was that, and we've just got some fantastic research back from the research companies for the government, the federal government, and the resonance with Fred being, who was an Aboriginal man, Aboriginal family, but non-Indigenous people saw that man as a man that was just dealing with the family issues and taking that forward. They did not for a moment think that he was an Aboriginal man. And to me, that's a sweet spot. That is like saying that's leadership by just accepting the reality behind that. And for us to have contributed a methodology behind doing that was quite strong. We recently did something similar with a domestic violence campaign for the state government, Stop the Hurting, where we spoke to Aboriginal focus groups and kids about what they wanted to see. It was a 12 to 17-year-old demographic target group, and the idea was to, what they want to see, and the Indigenous kids said, look, we realise there's issues, but we don't want to just see us, we want to see everyone, and be a part of that, and that was great learning. And we created a campaign with Illy, the singer, hip-hop artist, and these kids, and it was something I'm pretty proud of as a campaign. It's quite unique. So
Good. Now, look, we were expecting to see some tweets coming out of Rockhampton and Laidley and so on. We haven't seen any yet, so if you have any, please let us send them through. Could I ask you any questions from the audience? And we have a microphone here. We have a microphone on both sides, so let's just raise the lights a bit on you so we can see where the questions are coming from. Now I can see your hands. Yeah, there's a question here. Thank you. Just over here. Just over there. Thanks. And please raise your hand if there's another question over here. Yep, right. We'll come to you next. Is that microphone on, by the way?
Okay. Thank you very much for tonight. And I was very interested in your journey, or your decision actually, to move from the federal government to doing what you're doing. I know you mentioned the disillusionment, but it's still quite a big decision when you go from, I suppose, a secure job, pay packet, etc.
Yeah.
Like, did you do that? Did you transition and you were doing something on the side, or was it literally just that clearer jump?
Well, I was disillusioned. I mean, I was more frustrated by a range of factors, and I mean, it's also a personal journey. Yes, there was the politics and all those sorts of issues and what we were working, but I really felt the need to be my own boss and take my own agenda. And if I was going to be frustrated about this, let's live and die by your own sword, so to speak. And what I did was I was in government, and I was there for about 11, 12 years, and I needed to break that, but I went to an MBA at QUT, and not just because they're the sponsors, but that was the reality for me, and to be able to do that and reprogram how I was thinking. So I specialised in entrepreneurship and strategy and governance, and those sorts of things I thought were the types of learnings I needed to take away to set up a successful business. I didn't have a lot of time to do that, so I did a very intensive 1 year to get back out because I didn't have any money coming in. So those sorts of things. So to actually start a journey and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, as they say, and it was successful. I'm not to say that it just was it was, again, very small gains to build and then build again, and as the theory works. But that's how it actually did work for us. So, and I was happy to move on with that.
There's another question just here. Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. I was just wondering, with all of the sort of paradigm shifts in the marketplace recently with what's going on with technology, these days a single app can be created that, for 99 cents, that can kind of change industries completely, like Uber, for example. What sort of changes will existing business models need to make, and what's the sort of mindset that a new entrepreneur should have going into creating new business ventures with all the rapid change that's happening?
Yeah, look, I think we've moved into an industry. I mean, the ad agency world is, very much a guarded world, and hasn't really probably shifted. I mean, it probably has in recent times, but it hadn't needed to really shift probably since the 60s and 50s when that model had come about. But we're a very bespoke and light business. There's only about 10, 12 of us. Companies traditionally are larger. They have digital teams and so forth. We work with professionals that come in. We bring people. But we maintain a very senior sort of management model that we work with groups. And the other thing around that is the general business practice, working with cloud-based technologies around like Xero and project tracking systems like Trello and Workflow and Harvest. Those sorts of things have made small businesses. I don't have big commercial overheads in terms of corporate support. It's really, you're looking at me and other people like me in my office. There's just a handful of us. And to actually do that and integrate with that makes things streamlined. So we don't have to be big. So if we can keep our overheads down as a business and not be bigger, that's what the digital disruption's really created for us. And it's made, the company was born out of digital disruption. When I originally came up with Carbon, the idea was we were trying to pitch the idea of video content over the emerging digital device. There was no iPhone. That hadn't happened. It hadn't happened for several years after we created Carbon, but we were thinking there was an opportunity to do webisodes and all that sort of low entry cost things, low barriers to entry, and then democratise media through things like the software products put up forward by Apple and those sorts of guys allowed us to start a business where traditionally it was going to cost millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars to gain an entry, and that's no longer the case. So.
Another question? Yep, thank you. Sorry. Peter? Microphone just here, thanks.
Wayne, thanks very much for an inspiring conversation. And I'm sure everybody in the room, well, certainly in my own case, we really want to see Indigenous businesses thriving. It's really important, for the Indigenous community, and it's important for Australia. You mentioned thinking a couple of times, and some of the references that you made led me to think about how you think and whether you're consciously aware of your Indigenous heritage and culture influencing the way you think. Because there's been a lot of criticism of Australian business leaders and entrepreneurs thinking very narrowly and being focused on the short term. So I wonder whether you're conscious that your Indigenous heritage is informing the way you think, not just about the day-to-day, but the future of your business.
I'd say yes, it does. And it's something that sort of became more apparent to me. It's not just uniquely me or anyone like that. It became more apparent in terms of particular philosophy. I went to a procurement or a supply diversity conference in the US in Orlando a few years back, and it's where the minority supplier groups are working, and there's billions of dollars worth of trade going on from minority groups working with the big blue chip companies and so forth. Over there, those companies are actively pitching for minority groups to come work with them, not because they're minority groups and for social good, but because the way that they think and the cultural diversity that they bring to the table actually improves the bottom line of their businesses. I don't know if Australia is anywhere near that. Particularly in the Indigenous space, I attend a similar type of event here in Australia. We have to pitch to pretty much government sources as an Indigenous business to engage with our services, and there's a mega mind shift because there's an imbalance to what is actually brought. There needs to be an appreciation that an Indigenous man, Indigenous ways of thinking, or Indigenous businesses actually bring significant opportunities for the bottom lines of whatever the business is, not just in the Indigenous space, but in terms of the thinking.
Different thinking, yeah.
Look, I met a guy. I sat on a Robotronica at QT a couple of weekends ago on a panel about old ways, new tech, and I was sitting with an associate professor from UTS in Sydney, and he was talking about the way robots and coding works and integrating Indigenous communication methodologies and traditions over thousands of years that have been developed into streamlining quicker synapse type thinking in the robots and the way we code robots. So he's thinking that there's a significant bottom line from something very ancient communication skill sets that are very traditional, but in how robots of the future will work, and as opposed to juxtaposed to a Western thinking methodology. So yeah, I do think that, and it's not just me. So yeah.
Well, question? Yep. Thank you.
Good evening, Wayne. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I'm more interested, I'm really passionate about social change as you are. And I believe that social change starts with the people. It's if you're waiting to move a bureaucratic government, you'll be waiting a long time. So I'm really interested in your opinion how we, as Australians, as part of the community, can change our behaviour to create social impact that creates equality for all Australians.
Wow, that's a big one. Well, look, you're seeing the debate, I think, on several social fronts at the moment, be it the recent recognition process for Indigenous Australians and how that was handled by the federal government, and the current marriage debate that's going on. And to me, I think facilitating clear lines of communications and being quite progressive in that space. I think Australians as a society, personally, I think we all have a voice and we need to share that. We don't necessarily need the government to tell us how to think about certain things. We need to be able to express ourselves in a way. We are very empowered in this day and age through the mechanisms we have to express our thoughts, but I don't know if we necessarily take the time to actually, the vast majority of us, to take our time to actually express clearly what we have to say, and it leads to quite radical thinking dominating the landscape about how our society would work, and that's my opinion. So I think on the whole, as humans, I think we should take a stronger stance and actually care about how we work better and to create an inclusive and diverse and respectful society moving forward.
We have a question from Laidley. Is just what is the one piece of advice you would give to a local business owner or local business owners? Is there one piece of advice that you would pass across the community of Laidley?
One piece of advice. I know it's tough, and I think and it's easy to say just stick it out and all those sorts of things, but the realities of cash flow and teams and working with people make things very complex. But I think keep an open mind is one thing. I think be decisive in your decision making, because at times I cannot be, sometimes I'm not that. So I should be that.
It's a question from Rockhampton too. What achievement are you proudest of?
I think it's hard to say. I actually really am proud of the evolution of the company now to where it's going. I think our focus is absolutely right. Rather than hoping that people get the social change, we're absolutely infusing it in the campaign work that we're getting. I mean, the beauty of 5 Kangaroos or those type of initiatives, we really are targeting kids and the youth around that, but we're doing it in a very subtle way. And you sort of hope that they get that. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they just enjoy dancing around like kangaroos. So that's really cool too. But to actually get more targeted information to people, and that's really hopefully making their lives and changing things is something I'm very proud of.
Any final question from the audience? Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Wayne. I was just wondering, as you said with Sesame Street, they were looking for content that was different to what you produce. How do you go about approaching a partner that might not necessarily be looking for what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a broader challenge anyway, because people, if you don't have a mindset or you don't know what you don't know, then, I mean, they weren't even looking down under. They wasn't even the radar. They were mostly didn't really realise that we took their Sesame Street, rather than, in other parts of the world, South Africa has its own version of Sesame Street. India has its own version, but Australia has American Sesame Street, and Australian kids were learning what the American kids were doing. So it was really difficult to actually put that to them, but it was just really opening your mind to it. It was like, well, we went with a beautiful piece of art. We deliberately, sometimes much to my despair, were overly iconic in certain things. We had to give them the outback, we had to go to Alice Springs, we had to do this, we had to have boomerangs, we had to have kangaroos. We went with the best Indigenous singer I could find. And I happen to think she's amazing. That was just throw that all in, make this fantastic cake. If that didn't work, then we weren't ever going to do it. It was just. That's right. It was just a lot of things fell into place, and sometimes it's just that bit of magic. You just smell when something is going to work, and they went, oh wow, we didn't even know that existed. It's just amazing. And that opened the mind, and thankfully I had some people over there, and I find if you share and have a conversation with people that, and it probably goes to the core of what we're about, if you have a conversation, share an idea, you'll exchange a message and maybe make some differences to people's lives.
So any final advice as we leave this to emerging business people, entrepreneurs, innovators in the audience tonight?
Yeah, look, I really it's probably just that last point. I think the effective communication, and which really was what the frustration of why I created Carbon was like. I said there's got to be a better way to communicate positive change and make things different. I think we're quite simple beings. If we sit down and talk and communicate, the type of mechanisms that are available for us to communicate have been complex and ever changing. But at the end of it, to have a conversation and share an idea and be respectful, has allowed my company particularly to put that in the forefront and succeed. And we deal with all the real trials and tribulations of a business, but the ability to communicate, I think is the strongest thing.
Good. Now, to conclude the conversation, let's look at this film, S for Siblings.
S is for sibling, something that we call brothers and sisters in a family. S is for sibling, they're lots of fun. You may have many, or you might just have one. Sometimes they look very different. Sometimes you can't tell them apart. They make different choices and have different voices. They learn to play fair and they learn how to share. Your family.
Not bad. Can I just say to the people in Laidley and Rockhampton, thank you for being with us tonight. And we didn't get to all your questions, but thanks so much for your questions. Please thank Wayne Denning. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, Wayne and Ray, for allowing us to sit in on your conversation. And I think one of the great things about the Game Changer series is the opportunity to hear firsthand from successful leaders about their reflections, their insights, their experiences, and that's certainly what we've had the opportunity this evening to hear from Wayne. And I think for me, it was the clarity of focus around what you wanted to achieve and that being positive change. So congratulations on everything that you've achieved. If you would like to revisit this evening's conversation or share it with friends or colleagues, the webcast and transcript will be available on the State Library of Queensland website within the next week. And once again, we thank you for being here tonight and supporting Game Changers and the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. And thank you also to everyone at Laidley and Rockhampton for joining us as well. It's the first time we've done a live webcast, so we hope it was successful in both of those communities. We'd also like to invite you along to the next Game Changers conversation, which will be on Wednesday, the 18th of October. And Ray will be speaking with Therese Rain, founder of Indigenous. I hope I've said that right, Ray?
Yes.
Yeah. An international employment service agency assisting job seekers, in particularly long-term unemployed people entering the workforce, and I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic conversation as well. So that's on Wednesday, the 18th of October. So please now we'd like to invite you to join us on the Queensland Terrace for refreshments, which is supported by our generous sponsors Cloverley Estate and Newstead Brewing Company. And those of you in Rockhampton and Laidley, you also have your own networking experience as well. So do have a great evening. So thank you again for joining us this evening. Thank you.